Normally in 3D printing, if you've sliced a number of objects on your bed, they're all going to print together at the same time. It'll print the first layer of all of your objects, move up, print the second layer of all of your objects, move up again, and so on. But in Bambu Studio, you can also select to print by object, and with this selected, it's going to print one object in its entirety, move on to the next object, starting with layer 1 again, print that object in its entirety, and then move on again. There's a number of reasons that you may want to do this, and there's advantages and disadvantages to both methods. In this video, I'm going to explain some of the reasons you might want to print by object, what some of the potential disadvantages are, and how you can do it. So, let's have a look. As I say, there's a number of reasons that you might want to print by object, though at first glance it might seem more hassle than it's worth. One potential use case that easily springs to mind is the assurance that if one object fails on your bed, it's then not going to go around and ruin all of the other objects you've already printed. Though with the cancel object feature built into all of the Bambu Labs printers and available on other printers using Octoprint, this is less of an issue these days. That said, if you're not constantly monitoring your printer, printing by object will ensure that if an object does fail, it's not going to then cake everything else on your bed in stringing and ooze, which would happen if you were printing by layer and you hadn't noticed the failed object. Print by object is also popular when you're printing multiple objects in TPU, because focusing on a single object at a time, which will affect the speed and timing, can improve the overall print quality of these objects. For me, however, the biggest advantage of print by object is the amount of time and material that can be saved when you need to print multiple objects on a bed, each one being a different color or material. By printing something like this by object, it means that instead of having to change the filament for each material that's on the build plate for every layer of your print, you're just changing the material once each time it starts a new object, and this can save a huge amount of time. If you look at this example here, I've got two benches on the print bed, each one a different color. If we slice this as print by layer, it's going to take 6 hours and 28 minutes to print. If, however, we change it to print by object with the exact same settings otherwise, this is now only going to take 59 minutes and 33 seconds to print. Not only does it save a huge amount of time, it also doesn't need to purge the filament dozens or hundreds of times per print, saving you a ton of material. Using the same example, you can see that when printing by layer, this will use 96.71 grams of filament, though that was more like 150 grams before I'd adjusted the flushing volumes. When printing by object, however, this is using just 25.13 grams, which is just over a quarter of the amount of material. Now, whilst it can be very useful, there are certain drawbacks and limitations to print by object, one of the biggest ones being that you can print far fewer objects at the same time. This is because once an object's been printed, you need to ensure that there is enough space left around the outside for the extruder carriage and for the X-axis rails to be able to print subsequent objects without colliding with anything it's already printed. Okay, well, let's have a look at how you can set up print by object in Bambu Studio. The first thing you'll want to do is head over to the Others tab under the Process Settings, and then scroll down to Special Mode where you'll find the setting Print Sequence. Next to this, you'll have two options, by layer and by object, which we'll set it to now. You'll notice a few things have changed here. The purge tower has disappeared, there's a couple of big cubes around the print area, and there's a number of shapes surrounding the objects on the print bed. The dark blue box here represents the distance between the bottom of the nozzle and the bottom of the X-axis rails. Effectively, this is the area of clearance between your nozzle and the bottom of the X-axis rails. The light blue box represents the height of your printer's lid or the cross-section at the top of its frame in relation to the bottom of your printer's nozzle, and I'll talk a bit more about why this matters in a minute. There are also these shapes around the objects themselves on the print bed. These ones on the bottom show the area of clearance required to allow the extruder carriage to get around the object once printed. The one at the top shows that one or more of the objects is inside the clearance area of the X-axis rails. You can see at the bottom here that Bambu Studio has highlighted an error saying that 3D Benchy is too close to others. This is because the clearance area of these objects is overlapping, meaning that it's going to collide with one of these objects once it's been printed. So we need to move the objects away from each other so these clearance perimeters do not overlap at all, and then our error message is going to disappear. However, when you've got print by object selected, the arrange buttons down here and on the toolbar at the top will take this into account and ensure that these areas are not overlapping. The auto arrange buttons when using print by object are particularly useful because as well as taking into account clearance perimeters, it will also take into account the positions of the objects and the order that they're going to be printed in, and therefore where the printer needs to move in order to print the next object. Now, if I shuffle these around a bit, rotate this one and move this over here so the clearance boundaries aren't overlapping, you can see that they're definitely completely clear of each other. They're not overlapping there at all, yet I'm still getting an error down in the bottom right saying that the 3D Benchy is too tall. This is because even though the Benchy is not a tall object, the height of the chimney here is higher than the clearance of the x-axis rails. So once it's been printed, if the x-axis rail was to move across it, it would then clip that object. Because I've got the other object in the same plane as it on the y-axis, it would only be able to print that second object by having the x-axis rail collide with the first object. So by arranging them like this, the x-axis no longer needs to be in the same area again after printing. The final clearance marker here, represented by the light blue box, is the printer's lid, or the inner ceiling of your printer. When you're printing by layer, if you're using a Core XY style printer such as the Bambu Labs X1C, the bed lowers itself down as your object is printing, and it never goes back up again during that same print. As a result, as your object gets taller, the bed is moving further away from the lid of your printer. When printing by object, however, when it starts printing the second object, the bed will raise back up again to start printing the first layer. If the first object you printed is taller than the space between your bed and the lid of your printer when the bed is homed, that's going to cause a collision. Now, if you're using a Bambu Labs printer or one of the other printers with a featured preset in Bambu Studio and haven't modified your printer, then your clearances should be set appropriately for your printer. Ensuring that your printer is selected in the drop-down menu, click the Edit button, then scroll down in the Basic Information tab to Extruder Clearances. If you are using one of the built-in printer presets, these settings won't be editable, but you don't need to unless you've modified your printer. If you are using one of these presets and you have modified your printer and need to change these settings, you'll need to create a custom printer using your current preset as the default settings for it, and then you'll be able to edit these settings. If you are, however, already using a custom printer, you'll need to make sure that your extruder clearances are set correctly, so let's go through what each of these settings do. So as I just showed you, with your printer selected, click the Edit button, scroll down to Extruder Clearances, and then we've got the three settings. Now, the first setting we have is Max Radius. This refers to the biggest radius of clearance required from the nozzle outwards in the X and Y axis. So measure the biggest distance from your nozzle to the outside of your extruder and add a couple of millimeters for safety. The next setting is Height to Rod, and this is the distance between the bottom of the nozzle and the bottom of your X-axis rods or rails. The final setting here is the Height to Lid. This is the distance between the bottom of your nozzle and the bottom of the inside of your printer's lid. Once you've set these, you can close the printer settings and they will then be used for determining the clearance on the build plate. Well, that's how to print by object in Bambu Studio. Hopefully you found this video useful, and if you have, please make sure you mash those like and subscribe buttons. If you'd like to support me and my channel and get access to exclusive goodies, you can now become a member of the channel by hitting the join button underneath my video and following the instructions. Either way, and until next time, thanks very much and happy printing. A massive thank you to my channel members for your support. I look forward to chatting to you guys again on Discord. For the rest of you, if you would like to join our community, you can become a 3D revolutionary by hitting that join button below the video and following the instructions. Either way, check out one of my other videos, have some fun or learn something new. Thanks very much guys, and until next time, happy printing.